What am I thinking? Because apparently this is giving
It
me
might be. I don't have the 1962 test, because a year later, that's when we
Starfish
signed the
Prime. Is
Okay.
what it was called. Yeah. So
a year later we signed the limited nuclear weapon testing.
So in 1962 there was something called Starfish Prime.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just the Wikipedia article. When I searched for Project Starfish, it pulled some shit up from like Suicide Squad.
Intelligence officials apparently
what I'm
are
talking
saying
about.
that Mr. Putin might be betting that the threat of nuclear weapon explosion in space is different from the threat of the destruction of Los Angeles or London.
It is different.
Honestly, because if you wipe out
100%,
London or
if
Los
you-
Angeles, you kind of be doing us a favor.
Well, so we'll put it this way, right? If you were to launch a nuclear strike against any country that also has nuclear weapons, they're going to do something in return, which leads to the Cold War style, this is what an interesting game. It seems the only way to win is not to play type bullshit where like even the UK has enough nuclear missiles to completely genocide the population of Russia. Like all of them. They have enough nukes to kill everyone in Russia.
And it would be something to say that, oh, well, an EMP could even take out nuclear silos, which are almost absolutely EMP protected.
Just to a certain degree, maybe. But, I mean, enough of an EMP will start melting your Faraday cage, so who knows. But the point would be that if you use a nuclear weapon in space to knock out satellites via an EMP, what you haven't done is kill anyone.
True. And you have a lot of angry people that can't browse Facebook or TikTok.
No, they will be able to. The amount of information that comes over satellites is not that much.
It is something to say that military-wise, like, it would be quite damaging.
There's things like, GPS.
Yeah.
Earth imaging satellites with specifically spy satellites that are going to get destroyed. The Blue Forces Tracker constellation, which is very important to tactical operations, will be affected. GPS probably, even though it's in medium Earth orbit, not low Earth orbit, might probably still be affected. But you're not going to lose connectivity to servers unless those servers somehow are in range of the EMP effects.
It is a question though of how many modern day
most of the internet
hubs are EMP protected though.
Most of the internet comes over a fiber connection,
which is not very susceptible to interference.
Which is why I was laughing at people freaking out about the Houthis saying that they're going to cut fiber cables. They're like, oh no, I won't be able to talk to India. That's going to matter.
One, the Houthis have the capability of going that deep. Impressive.
It's not that hard because all you have to do is find where the cable is and then drop an anchor. And you fucked that cable.
Maybe the cable is maybe a meter in diameter. That's pretty good accuracy for some bunch of raggle-taggy.
I can drop an anchor all day until I hit it.
That's why the Navy SEALs have to go sink more
the
Houthi ships.
The GPS positions of those cables are very widely understood because of the fact that all it takes is someone dropping an anchor on it to kill it.
I want to have questions from those who have been silent this entire segment.
I had this thought running through my head while you guys were talking about this whole thing.
Go ahead.
And you guys are gonna think I'm like some idiot or something. But I immediately started having a PTSD attack because of Modern Warfare 2. That mission, whenever the EMP sets off you're talking
about
medium orbit.
Dude, when the nuke sets off in Modern Warfare, the first one, when you're in the back of the helicopter, and all the radio cuts out.
No, that was in Modern. You see, that's what I'm saying. That's Modern Warfare 2. Yeah. So there was a mission where the capital was invaded by Russians.
Yeah. No. I mean, when you're in the Middle East and you're in the back of the helicopter.
No, but he's talking about the second one.
Yeah, but I'm talking about the first one.
Okay.
All the radios cut off.
That's the second one.
As a side tangent, I've actually had discussions.
The second one.
I am
But not the
ham
reboot.
certified,
But it does get me a little
GMRS certified.
It gets
So I've
me
actually had
scared.
discussions
I
with
just
people.
transmit, and when boomers get mad, I move locations.
I had discussions with the local GMRS group up here.
That's a joke. I don't transmit. Don't come after me, FCC. I was about to say FAA. I don't do it. I don't have a radio.
I do. I do occasionally pop on the GMRS network.
Except a K-band capable satellite communications terminal.
And talk to the people. And yeah, these people, if you're in communications, that's definitely something that people are concerned about. And one of the things that could be quite usable and actually quite valuable is that kind of communications, GMRS, which stands for General Mobile Radio Service, and ham, Those are all, going to be quite vital if that situation comes out and people do protect their equipment from EMP.
Technically, so will Smarties.
Yes, true.
God forbid we ever have to actually use it. But yeah, that's what I mean. It definitely. I know it's silly to bring up the video game, but it's definitely a crazy thought to even.
Are you putting the
fathom.
timestamp?
Yep.
To bleep that out.
Yep.
Because the fucking like when that EMP set off, I think it was like medium orbit in the game, and damn near you're just like you're in the capital, Russians are invading. You're trying to hold down the fort. All of a sudden you're seeing the Blackhawks come down, F-16s crashing into the
That mission
ground.
was fucking dope.
It was scary because obviously as a kid you're like, oh, this is so cool, but then you're like,
It
whoa,
could
if
happen.
someone could actually make an electromagnetic pulse this massive,
you can
you'd be taking down satellites, you'd be taking down everything.
You
that
can
uses,
do things as well on the ground. You don't have to launch a nuke in space.
right, but it damn near set. It,
for sure.
It destroyed a lot.
And a lot of quote unquote preppers, doomsday preppers, do keep things like ham radios and stuff like that in Faraday cages and have them grounded and protected for that possibility. Because if an EMP does go off, the thing about it is like if you have. So let's take a repeater situation here. When I mean repeater, so we have like if you look at the radio service, right? Because the FCC kind of divvies up a bunch of radio frequencies for use by not only military but also civilians, right? And me being a civilian now, ha ha ha. I mean, I was GMRS certified even while I was in. I had a little antenna on top of my car and a radio inside my car to do this shit. But if we look at a repeater, it's exactly what it sounds like. It receives a signal and then broadcasts it over a larger range, right? So I can touch Tiger Mountain, which is a repeater northeast of here, about 25 miles, 30 miles, because it's on a mountain. I obviously have an advantage to reach it. But then that broadcasts out to a massive area. I can touch Seattle. I can touch Bonnie Lake. I can touch a huge portion of, eastern of the Puget Sound, which is great. And ways to defend against this, if you have a EMP, the thing about EMPs is they're broad spectrum. So they're going to affect a massive portion of the spectrum, right? So they're going to affect microwaves, radio waves, some portion of UV, infrared, and all those things that rely on communications with those frequencies are going to be affected. And the issue with EMPs as well is that there's going to be portions of that EMP that have wavelengths which are the perfect size to absolutely fry circuit boards and a large majority of electronics. So like your phones, done, right? Radios, if they're not protected, done. And so you have different ways of protecting them. Obviously Faraday cages, which is like a quote unquote, RF or EMF net that can capture this and transmit it to ground. Basically, a Faraday cage is a fancy antenna.
Right, but I mean, Isaac was stating that the Faraday cages could be burned through.
The issue is coming with, because EMPs are such a broad spectrum. Prime example, if we look at a microwave oven, okay? We look at a microwave oven, and you notice how there's like this mesh on the door?
Yep.
These weird circles,
mm-hmm.
right? If you look at a microwave oven, and you look at the frequency that they use, you can then calculate through a formula the wavelength of that frequency, right? If you've been attending my classes, you'll know this.
I do remember you bringing it up.
Yeah, it's important, which is a lot of design stuff that comes into effect.
Yeah.
But the wavelength that a typical microwave oven uses is about 6 inches to a foot.
Yeah.
Depends. Now, what that means is, if you ever thought about it just for a moment, is we can go ahead and blast our food in a microwave oven with 1.5 kilowatts of energy, right? And make a bag of popcorn. And yet we can look inside this microwave and be completely fine. That mesh that's in front of the door is smaller. Those openings are smaller than the wavelength of the radiation that is being used to cook your food.
There's a reason why the waveguides on satellite communications terminals are the size that they are. And you can tell what frequency it is by looking at the waveguide.
Yeah.
Because they're designed for like the optimal size of that.
And so
wave.
in this situation, and it's a matter of proportion. So the microwave oven, those holes can be about
Actually,
2 to 3 inches wide, and they would still protect you from the radiation.
the wavelength for microwave, or like a microwave oven, is somewhere around 6 inches. It's actually a very similar frequency to.
By the way, folks, he just
Bluetooth.
popped in from grabbing sourdough and probably using the restroom, so I just said that. Thank you for validating me.
It's yeah. I just came back from the restaurant.
But for those who are just
I'm mixing whiskey
tuning
and
in.
coffee, so you know. Dangerous
so
mixture.
I know waveguides, they convert.
No,
Waveguides don't do
converting.
anything. It's
No
just a
converting.
pipe for the radio.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but don't it gets
No.
converted
Nope.
into L-band?
Nope.
So there is a piece of equipment that does that.
Okay.
Yep. Separate piece of equipment.
There's a whole circuit that takes the energy and then takes the information basically and then slows it down to L-band speeds. Anyway, Bluetooth and Wi-Fi are like the same frequency.
They're
as a
like
microwave
2.4, and
converter.
they have just 2.4 gigahertz, and they have a bunch of different channels.
Mm-hmm.
So, but effectively, with that microwave, we're able to see into that microwave oven because we obviously see in the visible spectrum, which is significantly smaller of a wavelength than that of
Exponentially
microwaves.
smaller.
Like so much. Nanometers is what visible spectrum is measured on, compared to inches, centimeters, etc. And so the issue with EMPs is that they're such broad spectrum that you need to be able to defend against that massive spectrum that they're going to be unleashing on you.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why we have, there's so many things that you can do. You have like aluminum foil.
At the same time, you probably don't care about things that are smaller in wavelength than your antenna size.
Yeah, so like if we're talking about the repeater example for GMRS that I was talking about, is that almost certainly an EMP would be the prime wavelength to enter a repeater antenna, fry the radio, and make it obsolete, right? So in defending against EMPs, you would need to have a backup radio. You would need to have some sort of surge protector where if at a certain voltage or relative voltage
Just Faraday
it
cage.
pops, you have a Faraday cage around important electronics. And so the only radiation that's entering your Radio Shack, quote unquote, is that's what's
But
getting entered by the antenna.
This is shit that the military has been doing since like the 60s, and one of the reasons why grounding is so important and why there's a specific manual on how to ground things properly so that high frequency or extremely high frequency waves that can be generated by things like lightning bolts or nuclear explosions don't have too much resistance trying to get to your grounding rod.
Yeah.
And why you're not supposed to actually wrap your grounding rod around wrap your the wire around the
all
grounding
of it is
rod.
important. They just don't tell you why.
So why don't we just have equipment that is mostly analog so that way we can combat
We
something?
cannot get into that.
Well, when you say analog, equipment's mostly analog. The issue with an EMP is that, do you know how
I already
electricity is
I already
made?
have to bleep out a certain piece of equipment.
We're talking about yeah.
Yeah.
But you can talk about spread spectrum.
Yeah, you're fine because all that shit's available on the
general.
internet.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's what you had to censor.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you noticed that he was running
I didn't
he was running the
realize-
timestamp as soon as you said that.
Don't talk about things that are secret, but spread spectrum
Yeah.
gets you through EMPs because it doesn't matter how much noise there is, and that's how cell phones work too. Technically, though, code division multiple access and spread spectrum multiple access are kind of similar, but basically those two things are jam resistant, and that's why we can have cell phones in the same room that aren't stepping on each other's transmissions.
Yep. Not to mention there's like 100 some odd channels in the 2.4 gigahertz band.
So
that the FCC quote unquote has allotted to us.
So when we get into defending against EMPs, what you have to remember is that the way that electricity is made is by a magnetic field moving across a wire. And so that means that every piece of metal that you have on you or in your equipment is now an antenna which is converting the energy from a nuclear bomb in the electromagnetic spectrum into electricity inside your equipment.
Which very well can be higher voltage than your system was ever designed to handle.
So you're saying analog could just be obsolete anyway?
So when you say analog versus digital, when you say analog equipment, right? What you're talking about is things that use sums of voltages to get data, right? And like nothing is DC, it's all AC, is what you're thinking. And when you say, oh, why don't we use analog stuff? It's because you can still make EMP-proof analog equipment, and now it's just worse at everything else because digital is the way to go.
I know, yeah.
It's slow.
And you can
it is much slower.
So you can harden all of the equipment the same way.
So you can make digital equipment that's more EMP proof.
Yeah, because the issue is you're going to have some kind of transistor.
If you want to break it down, is any piece of equipment, regardless of whether it's analog or digital, can be protected from EMP. In that example I gave you with the microwaves, right? The microwave and that screen. You know what the usual, like if I were to protect my radios, I have like fucking 5 radios up there.
And hypothetically, if you had an EMP strong enough, it will just melt your Faraday cage.
If you there'd be such a massive
the energy has to go somewhere, and it will become heat.
Yeah, you want to have it beefy. You don't want to have it pussy, right? You want to have a beefy Faraday cage to handle high amperage because you're going to be passing a lot of current very quickly. The standard prepper basic Faraday cage is aluminum foil. Why? Because it doesn't have any of these perforations. You have to make sure that you keep your aluminum foil pristine, no holes. Connect all of your aluminum foil in a steel box and have that steel box grounded. Not only that, don't let your radios touch the fucking steel box.
When I was doing
foam panels protecting your radios.
When I was doing some, we'll call it search and rescue stuff, but it's basically radio directional finding for emergency beacons, which most of the time is just
Civil Air Patrol.
Yeah, so people land too hard with their general aviation aircraft, and that will set off your emergency beacon, which the Air Force then detects and dispatches a volunteer organization to go find. And the way that you deal with it initially, until you can get the guy to come and remove his beacon or black box and disable it, is by they call it tenting. You just take aluminum foil, you make a cone or some kind of shape that'll cover the antenna for the emergency beacon, and you put it on top.
Yep.
And the issue that some people run into is they don't make it big enough so it sits on top of the antenna instead of covering like the antenna without touching it.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it's amplified and the Air Force gets angry.
So, there's so many things online about how preppers are defending from EMP. And here's a question though.
Not even just preppers,
this is what you have to think though.
It is a legitimate concern for ham or ham radio operators.
Totally.
Because you still want to be, and you can call it prepping, you still want to be able to operate a ham radio if there's a nuclear explosion.
And that's why I said that ham operators and GMRS and all those people who are in the radio sphere are well aware of this, and they are interested in defending their equipment. Because if I left those ham radios just out and about, they'd be useless in the event of EMP, which defeats the entire purpose. Right?
Yeah, most military equipment, though, should still be. It's designed to be hardened against EMP. It's not gonna, nothing is perfecly capable of defending against it.
You might have to replace a couple
because,
parts.
like I said, enough energy will just melt your Faraday cage. Though there becomes a point where, depending on the size of the nuke, you are just now going to be close enough where the thermal energy is going to melt your Faraday cage anyway.
Then
now everything's melted around you.
Yeah, now you're
now you're melted, so you can't.
You're now a shadow on concrete. I hope you had a funny pose.
How funny. Yeah, the EMPs are very interesting, and there's it's kind of hilarious if you think about back to 1962 when the United States tested their nuclear weapons in space. And we were like, oh, wow.
Knocked out the electricity on the entire state of Hawaii.
That was a lot more problematic than we thought.
Really cool video, though.
And then a year later, we were like, hey, we should, with Russia, Soviet Russia, we were just like, we should not. And like, yeah, probably. It's basically how it went.
I'm really mad that we didn't do a nuclear test on the moon, though.
That'd be interesting.
We should have done that. And now that the nuclear space treaty is essentially defunct.
Inside Science News.
That doesn't sound good at all.
Inside
Why
Science
would it not
News,
be good?
I don't know. Like, I feel like there's...
You know what's really cool?
Let's do it on the far side. Let's do it on the far side.
You know what's really cool? Going to the moon. You know what's even cooler than that? Explosions on the moon.
Yeah, but wouldn't there be consequences?
So I watched...
Like what?
Yeah, I mean, that
Think of
area
the
would probably
consequence.
be a little bit nasty, but who cares?
It doesn't
It's
matter.
the moon.
You can just not land there.
Don't land there. It's fine. And side news, this is mostly jest. I care about the moon a little bit. In side
the
news
environment on the moon is already fucked because you
in-
have rocks falling out of the sky.
In side news, just random science news, I watched a live stream 2 days ago or a day ago. SpaceX launched the first private lunar lander. So about in 6 days now, it should actually touch down on the night side of the moon.
You know what I love about SpaceX? Every time they have a launch, there's retards on the internet who see it, and then they're like, "That's a UFO," because they don't understand what rockets look like.
Yeah, it's
when you
it's
say
hilarious.
a private lunar lander, is it
There's
like
a privately funded
A
rover.
privately funded company.
rover.
So like,
so it's a rover.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
it's a lander. It's not a rover.
You call
It's
it
just
a
a lander.
All right, so if it doesn't move around, you say lander. There's no people on it.
Okay,
So it's a
It's a
probe.
lander.
It's a
going to
probe.
land where it lands, and that's it. A
Okay,
rover
we'll call it
will
a
land,
probe.
But it's
and
going
can
on
move
the
somewhere
dark side
else.
of the moon.
We'll call it a lunar
So
probe.
why
then.
is this such a, I guess, an advancement in this?
This is one. It would
So-
be the first time that America has effectively landed on the moon since its Apollo 13 missions.
The thing about the fact that the
and
government
some
had,
odd like what 40,
billions-
50 years,
had billions of dollars of money to do things, right?
and they're like, let's make the James Webb Space Telescope.
And sure, I mean that was fine. But so we'll say the government has billions of dollars to do things, but we want to privatize space. So it's important
Which
to
is great.
privatize space.
Great. Let's do it.
For them to be able to do space things like land a probe on the moon. So this is like, the thing is, it's only important because it's the first. It's privately funded. It's not a government organization doing this. There is a company paying money to get it up there, and they've paid the money to develop it, and they've paid the money to build it, and it is like, it's private property, right? It's not government property. That's why it's important.
Is this the first time a lunar lander has been on the dark side of the moon?
No.
No.
Okay.
So or at least I don't think so. I know the
So,
Russians.
Here's
The
information.
Russians famously
Elon
used
Musk-
captured CIA film to be
I
able
mean,
to take pictures on the
Russia-
dark side of the moon.
Fucking Russia also went on Venus. It took them like 3 tries.
I don't. Did they land on Venus? I know we landed on Venus.
We did not. Russia is the only nation to have landed on Venus and actually capture pictures from it.
Yeah, how long did that last before it got
Like 2
fried?
hours.
Yeah,
the
a
atmosphere's
while.
made out of fucking Drano, dude.
So they took
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just
So,
wondering how long it took
so
that
it
thing.
took them
for-
multiple tries. There was multiple iterations of the landing craft, and
Yeah, that
they
must have
got it,
costed a
and it
lot.
lasted enough to capture pictures and transmit the data back to Earth. Yeah, but anyway, Walker's looking into it. Elon Musk SpaceX has launched a privately
I was
owned
actually
moon
texting
lander.
someone, but I can Google it if you want.
Please, which could set a historic precedent for the United States, as Space.com reports the Odysseus lander, which is owned and operated by the startup Intuitive Machines, was launched atop one of SpaceX's Falcon 9 rockets in the wee hours of the morning.
The United States did land on Venus.
No shit.
Yeah.
With what mission? What
Let
year?
me open the article. The Pioneer mission.
Oh shit, yeah.
The Soviets also were the first people to do it, but definitely we also did.
1978 is when the United States did.
Venus just kind of sucks because, like I said, and I mean this very literally, the atmosphere is made out of Drano.
It's terrible. It's literally the worst. Sulfuric acid, just how it is.
Venus exists to just be there.
By the way, PSA, if you think you might need a plumber, don't use Drano. They'll charge you extra if you've used it.
Yeah.
If they know that you've used Drano, they'll
just
charge you extra. And if they don't know, then they'll charge you even more once someone burns their hands on sulfuric acid.
Yeah. Hey, questions about science? Let's go. Come on. We have Walker and Brandon, me, third person.
Are we talking about, we have
show.
questions about science?
Yeah. If anybody has it, you go.
What, a question about science?
Yeah, let's go.
Uh,
Angie and Marcus did it. It was great.
Are we going back to the Quantum Consumer Podcast? This is
I
a science
actually-
podcast now.
I mean, I'm just
actually,
I'm just some guy.
I just love the
Just like-
discussion about space exploration. I don't really give a fuck about the mechanics or anything like that, but space exploration in general.
I was about to
Because
say, if you do give a fuck about the mechanics, there's amazing games on Steam.
Kerbal, Kerbal Space
so
Program.
not even just Kerbal Space Program, but if you want something that's really interesting, actually, what's it called? Children of a Dead Earth. where it gets into like space warfare in a very kind of realistic way, not like hypothetically the most realistic, but a very realistic way to do combat in space.
But I'm
super
more so
interesting.
talking about the concept that privatized lunar lander going to the dark side of the moon. How long is it going to be there, and what are they looking for? What are they looking to research? What are they trying to record?
If lander is landing without people, it's going to be there for indefinitely.
So think about
indefinitely.
Yeah.
So they're gonna just even record findings and video footage.
Mineral studies. They could have a mass spectrometer. They could have, like general telemetry. On the dark side of the moon, it's not always actually dark. What that means is it's because it's tidally locked to us. It's a side of the moon that's facing away from us.
Correct.
So eventually you might want to land things there that can, let's say, do radio telescope stuff, right?
Yes.
Because it's blocked off from radio transmissions from Earth. So you can actually see more of the radio spectrum from space.
So you're saying that it's dark side of the moon, but it's not terribly dark, right? Because I would imagine they would also need to invest in
sometimes
a lunar day lasts about 14 days.
Okay.
What I mean is sometimes the sun shines there.
No.
What the dark side...
28 days.
A lunar month, yeah. So 29, something like that. What that means, though, is the dark side of the moon, when they say that, it's the side of the moon that never faces us.
Right.
Because it's tidally locked. Now, it's not completely stable, so like it moves around a little bit, but there is a side of the moon that is always faced to the Earth. And on the other side of that is what we call the dark side of the moon. Doesn't mean that sunlight doesn't go there. Like, legitimately, it sometimes is bright there. But it's hard to communicate there. You need like a relay satellite or something like that.
So, just a little tangent here. Intuitive Machines, the lander that's going there, its purpose is to carry 4 NASA cameras to study how the engines interact with the lunar surface. So they're basically looking at how the engine plumes of the lander.
They probably didn't need to land on the dark side. That's probably a little bit of extra science there, or an extra proof of concept. To be able to land on the dark side.
I would imagine it would be more or less mass spectrometry, so you're not getting interference from the sun, which is why they're probably landing on the dark side.
It could be mass spectrometry, but like I said, it could literally just be like a proof of concept, like we can land on the dark side of the moon.
I just like the concept of space exploration, and I feel like at the end of the day, landing on the dark side of the moon, because I've never heard of an actual lander or a rover getting to the dark side of the moon, and obviously you say
I guess you weren't
dark.
on the podcast. I mentioned that Japan had successfully launched and landed a lander on the moon.
I just think
recently
it's really cool because I want to get to the point where we actually start finding certain signs of life or possible existences of other life forms, and I think I remember very
likely not going to find that in our solar system.
Right, but I remember
unless it's on Europa.
Special day,
there is going to be
special day when they found signs of life on Mars.
If we find signs of life on Mars, that will have interesting scientific implications.
We've never
as
found
to the origin story of life on Earth.
So we've never found signs of life on Mars. And we think that Mars was at one point very hospitable to life, which means that maybe we should find things like fossils. And the other thing is we have a very surface level excavation. And if there's not literally like, you can't really fossilize bacteria. So like once
those are what they would be looking for.
I mean, the moon has
it's difficult to find because by virtue of you drilling
the bacteria that lived on the moon.
It's difficult because by virtue of drilling into the surface, you would be destroying the sample.
So what if that meteorite that was found, I believe it was Antarctica or somewhere, and
it was found on Earth in a place where things live?
So we find
it was a meteorite.
There's an entire field
which landed on Earth where there's life. So there's life in Antarctica. There's a lot of life in Antarctica. There was a lot of life when it wasn't a frozen hellhole as well, and technically it's too cold for a lot of germs to survive, but just because you find something on Earth with life on it and it came from outer space doesn't mean that
we found microbes that actually can sustain life in Antarctica. But that's neither here. Your point is that there's an entire field of astrophysics called astrobiology where we identify, wow, this has amino acids. That's cool. Which is just a series of compounds and molecules that
they all have to be like of a certain,
which is, obviously carbon based. But we're like, oh, that's neat, and that's quite frequent, which is what posits the question. Is like, okay, well, maybe this is where you get the comet, quote unquote, comet seeding theory is where like life on Earth was seeded.
I think you need like a certain
By a
type of
comet.
amino acid, and you need like a bunch of them in the right place.
There's a whole lot, but
Like the actual
The-
mathematical chances of life starting on Earth were extremely low.
Yeah.
Um,
if we look at Mars, for example, if we look at the terrain features, which is what I guess you can say astrogeologists look at, we look at the terrain features
the
of
dry
Mars.
riverbeds.
We
Yep.
see riverbeds,
Glacier ice caps.
estuaries. We see
Well, it's very, very likely that there was liquid water on Mars several million or billion years ago. And it's very likely that there was the very similar conditions to Earth, which is where we're like, oh, well, maybe there was life. But what we don't see is seashells in the
The-
rocks
well-
and then the mountains and stuff like that you would expect if there was life. And what we were looking for
as
is
life that we would
micro-
expect, which is why,
microbiology.
Yeah.
So even if they didn't have time to evolve into, like, you know, the Cambrian explosion, all kinds of weird horseshoe crabs with fucking
everything wants to
weird
evolve
mouths
into
and
crabs.
Everything wants to evolve fish with legs.
so
The thing is, it's interesting because we have, and exactly right. That's why we're looking and focusing heavily on microbes.
and then the other thing is, even if we find microbes on Mars, how do we know that it didn't come from the lander?
This
Right.
is the most critical part,
And
and
that's
it
why-
is important to be sort of cautious of this, and that's why there is very strict sterilization protocols with all of those things.
Hand
And not to
sanitizer only
mention,
kills
if what we're-
99.99% of the
If what we're
germs, though.
looking for is quote unquote microbe fossilization, it is arguable to say that whether or not the microbes were on the lander, there would not be anywhere near enough time for them to be fossilized.
Those fossils are also so small that I wonder, like, just wind erosion.
Well, we would also,
Would destroy
the whole
it.
idea of the next Mars mission is to actually return a sample, because we couldn't do nearly the study that we want to do on the samples with the lander itself or the rover.
It's limited in power and scope, I guess.
So we would have to return those samples.
So
So
what
a
is,
future mission would have to go there and collect the sample.
But
and
it's
come
also
back.
partially just mineral prospecting.
What is
because
stopping us from sending a lander or a rover or some form of unmanned device on research missions to Europa or Titan?
In the mic.
Uh,
Say that
so
again.
money.
In the mic. Say
Money.
that again. Do it again.
Sending research, having research missions to Europa or Titan.
So you
Those
know how
are-
there's pictures
those are-
of Jupiter?
Mm-hmm.
That's because we sent probes to Jupiter.
Right.
And the only difference between sending a probe to Jupiter and sending a lander to Europa, because that's in the Jovian system, that's a moon of Jupiter,
Mhm.
is the
Cassini did it. Voyager did it. As far as pictures
It's
are concerned,
just the funding.
we haven't landed.
like the technology is there. It's just yeeting a rock into space at the right trajectory.
There are missions planned, and
It just needs funding.
it needs funding. But we want to send. There's many different moons of Jupiter that are
There would be
Ganymede,
an issue
Europa,
if you want to get to
Io, which
the
theoretically
liquid.
have liquid oceans underneath the kilometers of ice.
Yeah, there'd be an issue hypothetically with getting to the actual liquid of Europa. There's also technical or engineering issues when it comes to the fact that, like, what we have as Van Allen radiation belts, Jupiter has like the same thing, but like way more deadly to electronics and people. So to get to Europa, you are going to pass through radiation belts.
It wouldn't be
And
as
there's
bad
not-
because Jupiter is farther, but they are something
there's
that you still have to be aware
High
of.
radiation bands.
And when we first discovered the radiation belt, we were like, oh my God, we can't possibly send somebody to the moon. This was a concern in the Apollo missions. We were like, we can't possibly send to the moon because they would just die from radiation. But it really was just problematic to electronics. and
Well,
we had to
it's
protect
problematic
against
to electronics and people. It's just that if you go, depending on what orbit you
that. If
take,
you set up an orbit in the Van Allen belts, you're kind of dumb.
yeah. But the thing is, you can't really avoid it very well in Jupiter, so it's bad long term for electronics.
We do have, there are missions
You don't want to be
that are
there
thought
for a
of
long time.
to go to Europa, Ganymede, Io, to do such a thing. And actually, if we look, I think
And
this might have
honestly,
it.
something very achievable
see-
in our
do you see this
lifetime that's
picture?
very cool is shit going to Europa.
Do you see this picture?
Uh-huh.
This is a
the
picture
Jovian system?
from my telescope right there
Oh.
of the Galilean moons.
You
of
would
Jupiter.
really, really like my grandpa because he built a I think it's got probably like 3 times the diameter of this thing. He built his own telescope, and you can get so clear pictures out of that thing of the Jovian system.
I would get much clearer pictures if I wasn't taking a picture from my phone.
Well, you can see the banding very clear.
If I did my DSLR setup on that, it would be beautiful.
The great red spot's insane.
And this is honestly something I wonder about, like with my father-in-law being a flat earther, just like getting a telescope and just taking it outside because he lives in the middle of nowhere in Arkansas where there's no light pollution. And
I wish.
Just like going outside. Now my wife gets mad every time I try to bring this up in the presence of him, but like, just like, oh, you believe in the flat Earth? Let's go outside with the telescope.
I have
other things.
Orion is up this time of year. I'm waiting for the skies to clear a little bit more so I can get some good images of Orion's nebula.
On the off chance Robert is listening to this, no hard feelings. I just
we're dedicating a fucking series to you.
I just want to show you cool things with a telescope. Don't take it the hard way.
I mean, I never seen through a telescope.
Yeah. I mean,
you would love it. This is a bad place for it, but you would.
Yeah.
Depending on what was the weather outside right now.
The other cool things is like taking pictures of spacecraft, dude. Like you got a good telescope, you can take pictures of the ISS pretty well. Like this telescope that he's got here is a little probably small for it. I don't know how much detail you can get, but you probably get like the general shape of it.
No, the picture does not do what you can see with that telescope justice.
Get a better camera.
You can see the color and banding of Jupiter with that. You can also see the rings of Saturn with that. It's just a matter of just doing it, and it's just a matter.
My grandpa has a friend because he's in the astronomy hobby who has like automatic tracking on a big telescope setup where he's got like pictures of it where you can see little dots of light floating next to it, which he says are astronauts.
That's amazing. Dude, I would love to just absolutely be able to dump $5,000 into a telescope setup and auto tracking and all that shit and just
become the part owner of a X-ray machine repair company so that when you get a bonus every year you can put that into telescopes.
Yeah, I'll just dedicate my dividend shares
that's what my grandpa did. He's
my telescope fund.
He's an electric engineer, and then he became part owner of a company that goes into hospitals and fixes their X-ray machines, so he just made a lot of money.
Good gig. Is he retired now?
Yeah. He's been retired for a while.
Yeah,
but
money.
Yeah, he got lucky because he's a boomer, of course, and he got, the economic advantage there. Not that he didn't work for it.
Yeah,
but
no, for sure. I mean,
so he joined the Navy. He joined the Navy during Vietnam, got a lot of training which he was able to use to make a living, and then go to college to become an electric engineer, and then use that to become part of this company, and then become a part owner of it, and then so he definitely lived in the era where it was more likely that you could pull yourself up by the bootstraps, but he also he worked for what he has, and now he got very successful, and now he's retired. But
Cap, beautiful. I call Cap. He has white privilege.
One of my coworkers is actually working on setting up a observatory at home in his backyard with the actual like dome shutter thing, rotating dome thing, with his it's a great idea.
I hope
you should go up on the Mount Rainier.
Freeze your ass off, look through the telescope.
Yeah. That's like an old astronomer rite of passage, is freezing your ass off on the top of a mountain to look through a telescope.
Yeah. What people don't know is that you actually need to let your telescope come to ambient temperature. So if I wanted to use that telescope tonight, I would need to set it out there for at least an hour. So that way all the mirrors can get to ambient temperature. Otherwise, you get the terrible
if there's any kind of condensation.
Effects.
The other thing is, we say ambient temperature. There's a lot of things wrong with doing things at sea level or close to it in terms of astronomy.
Like 300 fucking meters? Like, might as well be on a fucking boat.
Though it'd be better to be on a boat in the middle of the ocean because you don't have light pollution.
We are going to do trivia today, so you guys better buckle up. Nice surprise.
Like right now?
In a moment.
What kind of trivia?
We're going to do a little intermission, and then we'll go and dive into trivia.
Okay.
And, well, at any rate, thank you guys so much. Let's do a proper outro. Thank you all so much for joining us.
This was the whole podcast magazine show.
Whole podcast magazine. Thank you all so much for joining us, and as always, have a good one.